And this is World History 1, Chapter 2, Segment 2. The First Empire Builders. Ancient Sumerians were weakened by outside attacks. People that lived on the outskirts of the city-states began to attack and raid the cities constantly. People outside the city saw all the wealth, the power, and prestige that the people inside the city-states had, so they began to attack and eventually wear down and weaken the outside city-states. Sargon of Akkad. He's going to rule ancient Sumeria from starting in 2350 BC. He conquered all of the ancient Sumerian city-states and unified them into one empire with himself at the top. His empire went from the Mediterranean coast in the west all the way to present-day Iran in the east. His dynasty will last for 200 years. This is another photo that we're going to analyze. Whenever we analyze photos, I will give you a question. For instance, for this bronze sculpture, the question that I would ask would be, what does this statue tell us about Sargon of Akkad's character and about the culture of the ancient Sumerians? So what you would do is first describe what you see, and then tell me how what you see tells us about the ancient Sumerians or Sargon. So you would notice, you'd say that he has a beard that's braided. This would tell us that most likely this was the style of the time, that men wore beards. They were often braided and kept, and possibly even the longer the beard, the more prestigious a person. Then you would continue to look on, and you would see that he's wearing some sort of headdress right here, almost like a bandana, most likely made of leather. You can see that it's also braided in the back, and then you would also say that would be part of the style of the time period. And perhaps symbolically, this is worn around his head, similar to the way a crown is. So just by analyzing this sculpture, we can see a brief glimpse into ancient Sumerian culture. Next, we'll talk about the Babylonian Empire, which rises around 2000 BC. Once Sargon of Akkad's empire begins to fail after successive dynasties, the Amorites conquer and move the capital to Babylonia, making it the Babylonian Empire. Hammurabi's Code. Hammurabi's Code is a single set of laws that were made from existing rules and regulations at the time. However, this was the first time that all the laws were brought together, written down into one single unified set. Then once this happened, this code was sent all across the Babylonian Empire, and every citizen of the Babylonian Empire was forced to adhere to these laws, not local customs or traditions anymore, but this single set of laws. What this does is unify the people, because no matter what part of the empire you're in, you know that each law is the same. Some of the things about Hammurabi's Code: it laid out different punishments for the rich and the poor. So if you were a poor person who got caught stealing, you might have your hand chopped off. If you were a rich person and you were caught stealing, you might have to pay a fine. So it laid out the different punishments for each. Some of the other things that it dealt with were property and protections for individual people and retaliation. Oftentimes at this point in history, blood feuds would break out. So if you killed my brother, then I would in turn kill your brother, and then the cycle of violence would continue and continue. So what this did is lay it out, so it set it out that whoever was at fault would be punished for the crime, so that the circle of violence wouldn't continue and wouldn't break apart society. Here is a bronze sculpture of Hammurabi's Code. Here you see Hammurabi with one of his advisors, and then it's difficult to tell from this picture, but all of these things here, these inscriptions, this is all of Hammurabi's Code. This entire statue then was sent out to each city or each province and displayed, so that each person could read each set of laws and then would know what the crime and the punishment was. Next, we're going to move to the pyramids on the Nile. The Nile River is an interesting river. It's located in Africa, and it flows in a northward direction. Most rivers flow from north to south. The Nile flows from south to north. and we'll go over why that happens in just a few moments. The Nile River is also the longest river in the world. It's 4,100 miles long. It has a very fertile soil that it produces. It's a reddish tint. It, like the other rivers that we've talked about so far, produce silt. Once again, which is very fertile soil from the bottom of the river that when it rains comes into the surface, overflows into the nearby area, and then fertilizes the existing soil. The Nile River is a very predictable river. In July, the river will increase. Then in October, the river will begin to decrease, like clockwork. In the ancient civilizations along the Nile, the river itself was worshipped as a god, and the river was used to irrigate fields of wheat and barley. Here we see a picture of the Nile River. It starts even further below than what the picture shows here, and flows north all the way up, and then breaks apart here before it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. This is known as the Delta or the Fan region. And the reason for this is because if you look, these look like the fingers or part of a fan, like a Japanese geisha fan. This area here is more fertile than the rest of the river. And the reason for it is because it has more breaks in the river. When the river overflows, more surface area has more silt, making this a more fertile region than along the strip here. This portion here, from the cataract all the way up till the delta, is Upper Egypt, and then the delta region is known as Lower Egypt. Reason for it: this is a higher elevation than this here is, and we'll talk about the significance of Upper and Lower Egypt in just a moment. As I said earlier, the Nile is also a clockwork river. You could gauge the year by it rising and falling. Along with that, small changes could spell big disaster in the Nile River. If there was too much rain and the river increased more than it was supposed to by a foot or less, then the floods could be disastrous, wipe out crops, wipe out homes, and have big problems. However, if the river did not rise enough by just a few inches, once again 6 inches to a foot, then there would not be enough water to irrigate the crops. There'd be drought and devastation. Some of the things that help protect this region in Egypt were natural barriers. All around the Nile River is a very barren desert. To get to Egypt, you have to cross that desert, either in the east, the west, or the north, or the south. So you have to cross that desert very long distances before you got to Egypt, which kept many people out. Also, traveling by boat, once you hit the first cataract or waterfall on the Nile River, you couldn't take your boat any farther. You could not go over the waterfall, and it would be very difficult to get your boats down from the first cataract down into the river again, because the drop-off was so steep. It was basically cliffs all around, so you couldn't very well ford your boats either. This protected invaders that might come about using a boat into the Nile River region. In ancient Egypt, there were two separate Egypts. The first was Upper Egypt, as we talked about, which was of a higher elevation. It was a thin strip on either side of the river, and it went from the first cataract or waterfall till the Delta Fan, as I showed you in the map earlier. Then the second portion was Lower Egypt. It was of a lower elevation. It was wider, and went from the Delta or Fan to the sea. The Nile River is very excellent for travel. If you wanted to travel from south to north, then you would just simply follow the current. You didn't need anything else. The current was quick enough to pull your boat along. You could take your goods, load them up on a ship, let the current take you all the way up into the delta, all the way up into the Mediterranean Sea. Then to get back again, all you would have to do is hoist a sail, and the wind in Egypt traveled from north to south, mostly. So then that sail would propel you down the river, so you could bring your empty boat back again, or your boat filled with other trade goods, making it very easy to travel anywhere in Egypt by boat. Egypt will eventually unite into one kingdom. Around 5000 BC, Egypt is just several villages located along the Nile River. By 3200 BC, these villages had united together into two main areas, Upper and Lower Egypt. There are two theories as to how Egypt became united into one. The first is by the Scorpion King, and the second is by King Narmer. The one that is most currently accepted is that King Narmer conquered both Egypt and made himself king of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Scorpion King one, there's not much to go on. Even though there's not much for Narmer, there's still more significant evidence to prove that. And the Narmer palette is what we use as historical evidence to prove that Narmer united both. Before Narmer united Egypt, in Upper Egypt, the king or pharaoh wore a white ball crown. It looked like he had a bowling ball on his head. In the lower portion of Egypt, it was a red crown. When we look at the Narmer palette soon, you will see that Narmer is wearing a crown that has a red bottom and also has a white ball top, signifying that he is in control of both Upper and Lower Egypt. He will then move the capital to Memphis, which is in the middle of Egypt. The reason for picking Memphis is simple. If your capital is centrally located between Upper and Lower, you can effectively keep your eyes on both Upper and Lower to ensure that neither one will rebel against you, or if it does, you'll know right away and you can then mobilize your troops to put down that rebellion. Being at the center also means that you'll be at the center of trade. Any trade going to the north will have to go through Memphis, and then any traders returning south will also have to go through Memphis, so it's an excellent location for trade as well. This new kingdom, united by Narmer, will have 31 dynasties and last for 2,600 years. Here is the Narmer palette. Here is King Narmer, and if you notice, he has a club in his right hand. Down here, we see what looks similar to a person, denoting that King Narmer took over Egypt using his warlike skills. And then you have further images of people in the background and in the foreground here. And this is one of the key pieces of historical elements that show us that Narmer conquered Egypt through war. United Egypt continued. From 3200 to 2700 BC, this is when Egyptian civilization becomes set. From 2660 to 2180, this is referred to as the Old Kingdom. This is when those the civilization and cultural patterns become widespread. The pharaohs were also known as gods. They were god kings. They ruled using a theocracy. A theocracy is a blend of religious rules and state rules all in one. So religion is the same as state as government. The pharaoh controlled everything: the floods, the sun, people's well-being. They also ruled after death. This is known as Ka. And as you might have heard before in other social studies classes, pharaohs were entombed in pyramids, which were their final resting place, and we will talk more about those in subsequent segments.